In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and draw an eye. Now, the reason why we're going to start off with something so advanced is because we want to test out your drawing skills. The reason why we're doing this is because I want you to draw the eye now before you've gone through the course. And then at the end of the course, what I want you to do is I want you to draw the same eye, and you're going to find that your drawing skills go up by a lot as long as you do all the assignments and go through the entire course. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by drawing the shapes and lines that will make up our eye. Now, in any piece of artwork, in any painting or digital piece of artwork, it always starts out with the drawing. That's the base. And if the drawing isn't good, then the rest of the artwork is not going to matter and it's not going to look good at all. So we want to make sure that we focus really well on the eye before we start adding in all of our detail. So let's start with the main shape of the eye, which is sort of the football shape. Now, it's not shaped exactly like a football, but it's pretty similar. The thing you want to take into account is that it's usually more angled. So rather than having a football where one corner to the other corner of the football shape is on a horizontal line, it's going to be more at a diagonal line. So it might be something like so. And then we can maybe bring that side down a little bit more. And then down here, we're going to add the cornea. All right, so now we have sort of that basic shape for the eye. The next thing we want to do is we want to add in the basic shape for the actual colored part of the eye. So let's go ahead and draw that in. It's basically just going to be a circle right in the center of our eye. And you'll notice too that I'm drawing very lightly. The way I do that is just by not pressing very hard with my pencil. But this way I can always go back and erase if I mess something up. And I can also do a build up of highlights and values on top of this by doing it lightly. The next shape we want to add in there is we want to add in our eyebrow. So I'm going to start it right about there. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring it over like so. And then it's going to taper off in a down direction. Just like so. Perfect. Now I'm going to play with the shape of my eye just a little bit more. So I might bring that up to there, bring that down a little bit more. And I might start this a little bit further out. So like I said, making sure that you have your shape right is very important when you're creating your drawings. So you can also use your eraser, like I said, to erase away areas that you don't want any longer. Perfect. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add in the eyelid. So that's just going to be a line that starts out like so. So there's a straight line at the top, a little curved, and then it's going to come down like so and follow the shape of my eye. And then over here, it's going to taper a little bit towards the edge of my eyelid. The next thing we want to do is we want to add in our pupil. So the pupil is just the black hole in the center of your eye. So we want to sketch that in. We're going to make her pupil pretty small. So something like that should be good. Next, let's go ahead and mark where we want the bottom eyelash to be and the edge of our eyelid. So on this top area, we're looking straight on to the eyelid, and so we're not going to see the actual edge of the eyelid. But down here, we're going to actually see the top part of the eyelid, so we want to mark where we want that to be and where we want it to start. So that's going to be the top surface of our eyelid, and this will be the actual bottom part underneath the eye. Now let's go ahead and start adding in some detail. So the way we want to add in detail is we want to start out by shading very lightly. So I'm going to start with this top part of the eye. So slowly I'm just going to darken it and thicken the line. And because this is a girl eye, I'm going to add a little bit of an eyelash off that edge. Remember, don't push too hard. The further you get into your drawing, the more refined it'll become, and towards the end of your drawing, you'll be able to add in some really dark lines, but for now, you want to make sure that you're staying very light. Then I'm going to sort of blend this into this edge like so. So that way, it's not such a hard line, and it'll look more like a soft shadow on the top of our eye. Then I'm going to start bringing in some light shadow onto the white of my eye. So about there. And then I'm going to add a little bit of shadow along this edge. just like so. Now this area right here is being left lighter because it's called bounce light. Now I won't explain too much about it, but it gives our eye more of a wet look when we leave that highlight on that edge. And then we can add a little bit more of a dark edge along this edge. We don't want it to be too dark, but we want it to be dark enough that it stands out. And then I'm just going to continue to thicken this line. Now I want the top edge of my line to be pretty hard, but this bottom edge can stay pretty soft. Then I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit of shadow into the corner of my eye. And then we can also add some darker shadow along this edge of our eyelid, since that's where our eyelashes are going to begin. And we can also add a little bit of shadow underneath this edge, because this top part of the eyelid is actually going to be hanging over this bottom part, and so there's going to be a little bit of a shadow being cast over that. So we'll add that shadow in right now. And I'm just going to continue to layer in my shadows. Now you may be a little bit confused of why these shadows are being cast where they are. Don't worry too much. Later in the course, we're going to go ahead and learn all about this shadowing and highlight and values. But for now, just follow along and try to do exactly what I'm doing. Next, let's go ahead and start adding a darker edge around our eye shape. Then we can start darkening this part of the eye, the pupil, and we want to kind of leave this top edge out because we're going to put a highlight over that, or a reflection if you want to call it. But we're going to go ahead and start darkening that in. And then we can start darkening this outer edge a little bit more. Then let's go ahead and start adding some shadow and highlight to our eyelid. So this top part is going to be getting hit by the most light, so we're going to leave that bright white. And then on these edges, we're going to darken it just a little bit. Same on this edge. And then we want to add a dark shadow along this edge of the eyelid, so that way it stands out. Now this dark edge is being created by shadow, and it's very thin because you're barely seeing into that shadowed area between the eyelid and this top part of the eye, the brow area, but it's still creating that tiny little crease and crevice, and that's why we're adding in that dark edged shadow. Next, let's go ahead and start adding in some more shading up into this area, and this is going to start adding form into the brow of our eye. So we want to make sure that we add in this edge over here so that it adds some form over here, and then we're also going to add a little bit of form over here. And what we want is we want this edge to be a hard edge, and the edge on top, we want it to be a soft edge that slowly blends in to the top part of the brow. Next, we can go ahead and start shading a little bit more on this top area. As you're working on your artwork, you want to make sure that you move around very quickly from place to place, because if you spend too much time working on one area, you're going to overwork that area and you're going to forget about everything else, and then next thing you know, your piece is not going to look correct. So you want to make sure that you are jumping from place to place. So as you're working up here, if you see something down here that needs to be fixed, come down and fix it. Drawing is not necessarily about focusing on one area, it's about focusing on everything at the same time. Now this can be a little bit difficult, but the more you practice drawing, the easier this is going to become. And eventually it's going to become second nature and you won't even have to think about it. Next, I'm going to go ahead and start adding in some darker shadow along this top area. And I'm going to leave out an area up here because this is going to be my highlight or my reflection on my eye. And I can sort of start to sketch that out a little bit. I can also start to add a little bit of detail onto the eye. So this part of the eye is an actual muscle that pulls your pupil open and closes it. And so that's what these lines are, is it's just part of the muscle. Now I'm not going to get too detailed with this muscle area, but we can add a few lines in there just to make it look a little bit more realistic. And we'll come back later and add even more detail to that to make it look better. Next, let's go ahead and add in a little bit of detail onto the eyebrow. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to darken that area that we have there. Like so. That's all I'm going to do for now. Later we'll come back and add a lot more detail. Now I'm noticing that it's not very dark right here, so I want to darken that a little bit more because there'd be a lot more shadow there. And I'm also going to blend it in a little bit more on that edge. And then we can go ahead and add a little bit of shadow along this. And then we can also add some shadow along this bottom edge because our eye is on top of this plane, this surface. And so it's going to be casting a shadow down here. So we'll just add that in like so. I'm going to darken this area a little bit more. All right, let's go ahead and add in all that detail to our eye. Now, it's important to remember that you keep your pencils sharpened. There are a few cases where you might want a dull pencil to do shading, but for the most part, you always want your pencil to be very sharp. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to start off with is we're going to start off with the main part of the eye. This is going to be the focal point of the eye, and so we really want to focus on this. So I'm going to start off by first darkening this area even further. So now I'm pressing pretty hard with my pencil, and I'm just darkening the eyelash edge. Now I know we don't have any eyelashes in there right now, but for now we're just going to darken that edge. Then I'm going to come in here and start darkening this top area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start shaping my highlight or reflection, whatever you want to call it. But what a highlight or reflection in the eye is it's just a reflection of what's happening off in front of it. So over here, this might be the skyline of a city, and this highlight area is the actual sky. So when you're thinking about reflections, you got to think about the things that are surrounding that object. And that's what's going to be reflected into the eye. Whatever's white or really bright is going to be reflected on that eye. So, and sometimes you don't have to necessarily show what that actual reflection is. You just have to take that into account. And that will make your reflections look a lot more realistic. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to darken this area. The more contrast, the better your artwork is going to look. Then I can go ahead and start darkening this area also. So you'll see we're creating a lot of contrast between this part of the eye and the white of the eye. And we're also creating a lot of contrast between the outer edge of our eye and the inner part of our eye. And we'll probably darken this just a little bit, but we don't want to darken it too much. We want to keep that pretty bright so we keep that contrast. Now, if you're doing a brown eye, you actually would want to darken this area, but in this case, the eye is probably blue or green, and so we're going to keep it pretty light. Then we can go ahead and start adding in some more of that line detail for the muscle. Then we can go ahead and darken our pupil. And then what I want to do is I want to add an edge to my muscle. So since this is a muscle, it's going and it's curving around into this hole right here. And so we're going to get a top edge, just like we get on the bottom of our eyelid. We're going to get that on the edge of our muscle. So the way I'm going to show that is by darkening around this area, but leaving a light edge around this part of the eye. Now you want to keep that light edge pretty thin, but just enough that you can see what's going on there, like so. And that makes it look a lot more realistic. Now let's go ahead and continue to darken this part of the eye. I'm going to make this reflection a little bit smaller. And depending on how bright or how white something is that's being reflected in the eye, that's going to determine how light the reflection is. So over here, this area right here might be a little bit darker than this area because that might be buildings right there, or that might be a car or something. And this might be pure sky, and so that's going to be a lot brighter. So I'm going to go ahead and darken that area just a little bit and keep this area completely white. And we'll continue to add in more contrast. You can darken these shadow lines that create our muscle. Now let's go ahead and move on to something else, because like I said, we don't want to get too focused on one area at one time. We want to be working on everything pretty close to the same time, and then we keep working it and working it and working it over and over again. So let's move on to something else. So I'm going to start adding a little bit more shadow over here, maybe a little bit there. And we can add some more shadow along this edge. We can also start adding some more shadow onto the white of our eye. Add some more over here also. And then I'm going to darken and thicken the shadow on this edge, just like so. We want to soften that too, so it's not such a hard line. I'm going to darken this area and thicken it too. Then I can darken the shadow over here also. Then let's go ahead and add some detail up here to the eyebrow. So the way you draw hair on an eyebrow is just with really quick strokes, and you want to make sure that the hairlines are going in the correct direction. So starting off here, we're going to have them going sort of up and then curving over, so like that. And you see how I'm pushing hard and then just quickly flicking it off. I'm going to switch over to a sharpened pencil. So just like so. And then as we get over here, the lines are going to become straight. So rather than starting straight up and then curving over, we're just going to have them going straight over like so. And then we're going to do the same thing over here, but they're going to be going in a down direction. So just like so. And then over here on this top area, we're also going to have some that are coming at this angle, but up here. So we'll start like this, and come over. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and darken this eyelid area. So I'm going to go ahead and add some darker shadow into there. Darken this line, darken that right there. We might even add a little bit more shading in there. Same on this side. And then we might add some more shading up here too. And then I'm going to darken this bottom edge. And now the next thing we want to do is we want to add some eyelashes in there, because right now the eye is pretty bare. So let's go ahead and add those in. Now eyelashes are a very interesting thing to add because a lot of people do them incorrectly. So I'm going to teach you how to correctly add in your eyelashes on an eye. So we're going to start with the top eyelashes. Now the thing to understand about eyelashes is that they're in perspective. So they're not just lines that come off like so. Well, over here in this area, they're going to come off like so. But when you look at them on this middle area, they're actually going to do sort of a curve thing. So they're first going to come down off the eyelid, and then they're going to come back up like so. So they'll come down and curve, and then come back up. Same with over here, they'll come down and curve, and then come back up. And the further towards this edge they get, the more you're going to see that rather than looking straight on them. So like right about here, it's actually almost just going to be a line that comes straight down and then back up. Over here, you're going to start to see the curve, but it's going to be going in the opposite direction. So it's going to curve down and then come back up. So curve down and then come back up. You want to try to get those as curved as possible. That was kind of a bad curve right there, but it'll work for now. So we're going to continue to do this, and we want to double these up. So on each eyelash, we want to go ahead and add 2 eyelashes to each one, and we want them to sort of cross. So it might come like this, and then another one might come right there. Another one might come right about there, and another one there. This guy will get a second one, and that one will get a second one. This one will get a second one, and that one will get a second one. So now we have the base for our eyelashes. Let's go ahead and move on to the ones down here. And you'll also notice that I'm pushing really hard, and then just like the hair on our eyebrow, we're going to just flick it off. So we'll push hard, and then we're going to flick it off. We'll push hard, and then we're going to flick it off. Push hard, flick it off, just like so. And the reason why we're doing that is because it allows us to quickly get that nice curved line. So as we get over here, we're going to get a straight on view of it, and then over here, we'll see a little bit more of that curve, but going in the other direction. And then we want to double these up. Great. Now we can go ahead and start adding more eyelashes in now that we have the base. Now the reason why you want to add in these bases and spread them out is because this is going to give you the general direction of where your eyelashes should be. So as you start adding them in, you don't really have to think about it. So over here, I know it needs to kind of match between these two. So it needs to be like so. And over here, I know it needs to come down like so and come up like that. And so I don't really have to think about it too much where the direction is and what the perspective is. So I might add in another one right there. I'll just keep adding these in where I feel like they'll be good. You can also go over some of these again just to get a darker edge on them, and you want them to start out fatter at the bottom and then get thinner as they get to the top, so you can add that in by hand also. All right, great. Now let's go ahead and have a look at our eye and see if there's anything else we want to change. I think it's looking a little bit too light in some areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more shadowing. So places where I want to add more shadowing is like on this top area. And I also want to add some more shadowing up here. So I'll go ahead and add that in. And like I said, this is what I'm talking about. Drawing is very much about working your drawing over and over again and adding more and more detail every time you go around and add detail. And then I'm going to add in some more hair in here. You can darken this bottom area also. Great. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to add the reflection of my eyelashes, but on the actual eye itself. Now, the reason why we're going to add this in is because the eye is actually going to be picking this up, the actual eyelash itself, and that's why you're going to see it on the actual reflection. Now, it's not going to be a reflection, it's going to be a lack of a reflection. So like, for example, this eyelash right here is going to be reflected right there, like so. We can do that again over here. And basically, we're just going to redraw the eyelashes, but on the actual white part of our eye. Now, it's not going to show up in all places, but it will show up in some of the places, especially over here in this white area of the reflection. So you're going to see that right there. You're going to see those guys right there. Great. Now, I'm going to take my eraser and erase some of that out because I think I got a little bit too much of the eyelashes in there. Perfect. All right. So our eye is basically done. So your first assignment for this course is to draw this eye. Now, I know it's probably going to be really difficult for some of you, and for a lot of you, it probably won't look this good. That's okay. You're going to learn a ton in this course, and by the end, you're going to be able to draw this eye, and it'll look way, way better than your first try. Thanks for watching this lecture, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next one, where we're going to start going over the basics of line, and we'll even look at our drawing and see how we used a line in this drawing.